Okay, so we begin with the discussion of the Hanukkah lighting, and it comes in the Talmud. It's in Tractate Shabbat, which discusses the laws of lighting the Shabbat candles. So in that context, the Talmud discusses the laws of the Hanukkah candle, Hanukkah menorah. And we're going to see is there's a argument that I think people know about this, but there's an argument between Shamai and Hiro, really the house of Shamai and the house of Hiro. Shamai and Hiro were two sages of the Mishnah. They debated a lot of points of law. They were very different in their personality. We discussed them sometimes, but it wasn't just them. Each one founded a school, and you have the schools of Shamai and the school of Hiro. They were almost always arguing. And here we have a debate in the Talmud, as we will see. How do you light the candles? So everybody agrees there are eight nights of Hanukkah, but here everybody agrees that every night we light a different number. And here we have the disagreement where Shamai says on day number 1 you light 8, and then you go down 7, 6, 5, 4, etc. Hillel says no, you start with 1 and you increase. And we follow the halacha like Hillel, of course. In most matters of the law, we follow Hillel. So virtually all matters of the law, we follow Hillel. So that's why when we light the menorah, we light 1 to 8. We start with 1 and we go to 8. So that's relatively known. People know about this disagreement, and we discussed that in the past. Maybe we'll get to it today as well. What we're trying to do today is we're trying to analyze what are the reasons for this debate. And the Talmud sets them forth. It sounds like just various reasons. We're going to see what are the ramifications of this. In other words, it's a debate about what is Hillel's reasoning. And that debate about what is Hillel's reasoning has ramifications to the way we do the halacha today. Okay, so that's one thing we want to talk about. Before we even go there, there is a interesting piece of the Talmud which actually says that the original mitzvah is that every house, every night, you light 1 candle. This whole idea of having a Hanukkah menorah that has 8 candles is not the letter of the law. That's not the obligation. It's doing the mitzvah in a preferred way. So I'm going to share the Talmud and we're going to read it. That may be surprising because not everybody knows the beginning. So I'm going to share the Talmud again. Shabbat, Tractate Shabbat, page 21b. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. The sages taught in a Baraita. The basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is each day to have a light kindled by a person, the head of the household, for himself and for his household. In other words, every household has 1 candle per night. That is the mitzvah. Now you go to a house today, no, there's multiple menorahs for multiple people. That's not the basic mitzvah. The basic mitzvah is 1 candle per household. The Mishnah, the Braita continues, and the mehadrin, literally mehader means someone who wants to beautify the mitzvah. Somebody who wants to do the mitzvah in the best way possible. So he says, and the mehadrin, i.e. those who are meticulous in the performance of mitzvot, kindle a light for each and every one in the household. So the basic mitzvah is 1 candle per household. If you want to beautify the mitzvah, you want to be mehader, you want to make it beautiful, so you'll have 1 candle per person in the household. So doesn't matter what day of Hanukkah it is. Every day of Hanukkah, the same amount. If you have 3 people in the household, you light 3 people night 1, 3 people night 2, etc. Now that was those who want to beautify. What is about those who want to beautify beyond the beauty? So they call it mahadrin mina mahadrin. They beautify even more than the beautiful. In other words, they beautify even more than beautifying. In other words, it's at 1 level up. So he says here, and the mahadrin mina mahadrin, who are even more meticulous, adjust the number of lights daily. So in other words, this whole discussion that we have of modern Hanukkah menorah, where we light a different amount every night, that's the 3rd level. That's the highest level of doing the mitzvah. How do they do the mitzvah? So here we have a disagreement. The house of Shamai say, on the first night we kindle 8 lights. And from there on, we gradually decrease. He gradually decreases the number of lights until on the last day of Hanukkah, he kindles 1 light. And Beit Hillel say, on the first day, one kindles one light, and from there on, gradually increase the number of lights until on the last day, he kindles 8 lights. So that's the disagreement. Now, but we understand that it's actually interesting because usually in the mitzvah, usually in the Torah, you do the mitzvah in the regular way, and then you do the mitzvah in the beautiful way, in the preferred way. The only mitzvah throughout the entire Talmud that you would see that there's actually 3 levels of doing the mitzvah. I'm saying in the Talmud itself, you have the Talmud itself says there's the mitzvah, there's the way to do it in a beautiful way, and then there's the way to do it even more beautiful. And that's what everybody does. Well, today, the universal custom, nobody lights 1 candle per household, which is the basic mitzvah. Nobody lights 1 candle per member of the household. Nobody does that. We have a menorah. We have a candelabra where we will light a different amount every day. And that's the best way of doing the mitzvah. How do you do that? Shamai says 8 to 1. Hillel says 1 to 8. Okay, fine. So that is the first piece that we're going to address. Now the question is, what is the reasoning of Shamai and Hiro? So here we're going to again share the screen, go back to the Talmud, and the Talmud is going to give us the reasons. But of course, like everything else in Judaism, not only is it this disagreement between Shammai and Hillel, but there's a disagreement. What is the reasoning of the disagreement of Shammai and Hillel? So there's a disagreement about the reasons. Now, it's not just because Jews love to disagree, but as we will see later, one of the innovative ideas of the Rebbe is that the difference between the reasons actually has a practical ramification in the way we keep the halacha and the way we do the mitzvah. But we'll get to that. So far we're still learning Talmud. So we're going to share the screen again. Amar Ula. Ula said, there are 2 Amoraim in the west. West is Eretz Israel. If you're living in Babylonia, in Baghdad, or around Baghdad, the west is Israel. So in the Talmud, when you say Ma'arava, the west, you refer to Israel. For us, Israel is the east because we live west of Israel. But in the Talmud, the Ma'arava, the west refers to Israel. So Ula says there are two Amoraim. What are Amoraim? So there's the sages of the Mishnah are called Tanaim. The sages of the Talmud are called Amoraim. So he says, Ula says there are 2 Amoraim in the west and Israel who disagree with regards to this dispute. In other words, there's a disagreement about the reason for the disagreement. So what is the disagreement? Rabbi Yossi bar Avin and Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida. We have these 2 sages. One says that the reason for Beit Shammai's opinion is that the number of lights correspond to the incoming days, i.e. the future. On the first day, 8 days remain in Hanukkah, 1 kindles 8 lights. And on the second day, 7 days remain, 1 kindles 7, etc. The reason for Beit Hillel's opinion is that the number of lights corresponds to the outgoing days. Each day, the number of lights correspond to the number of the days of Hanukkah that have already been observed, that were already observed. So that's the first opinion. What a wonderful disagreement, right? What are they saying? They're saying, Shammai says, you want to count how many days are left? And in the 8 days of Hanukkah, there are 8 days left. In the first day of Hanukkah, there are 8 days left. Hillel says you want to count not how many days are left, but how many days have passed. And on the first day, some of the first day has already passed. So we're not going to go into it here, but there's a well-known explanation that what they're really arguing, what they're really arguing about is potential or actual, right? Beis Shammai says the potential. We want to look at the potential, and therefore, there's no point of focusing on how many days passed. You want to know how many days you have left, because we're celebrating the potential that still remains. Hillel is much more focused on the actual more than the potential. So the potential is less interesting than what I have in my hands. And therefore, we're going to count the days who have passed. But that's an interpretation of this interpretation. But the bottom line is that's the first debate. The first debate between the first opinion about the debate of Shammai and Hillel of how many to light, 1 to 8 or 8 to 1, corresponds to the days of Hanukkah. How many days passed, or how many days are left? That's the first interpretation for the reason. Now we have a second interpretation. And one said, let's share the screen. This is the second reason. And one said, let's see if I can make this bigger. Yeah, I could. And one said, the other rabbi says, that the reason for Beit Shammai's opinion is that the number of lights corresponds to the bulls of the festival of Sukkot. This seems like completely out of whack. If you look at the Torah, in the portion of Sukkot, on Sukkot, they would bring additional offerings, offering of Musaf. And in the times of the temple, when they brought the offerings of the additional offerings on Sukkot, every day they decreased the amount of bulls offered on the temple, on the altar. Oh, so what do you see? You have precedent. That numbers decrease. In holiness, numbers decrease. Because in the bulls of the temple, bulls of Sukkot, they decrease. So 13 were sacrificed in the first day, and each succeeding day, one fewer was sacrificed. Look at Numbers chapter 29. So therefore, Beit Shammai is saying, we have precedent. So with Hanukkah is the same thing. We start with 8 and we decrease. The reason for Beit Hillel's opinion is that the number of lights is based on the principle one elevates to a higher level in matters of sanctity, one does not downgrade. Hillel says, what do you mean? You're supposed to increase in holiness. So if you're supposed to increase in holiness, you don't degrade, you don't decrease. And therefore on the first day you light 1, and day 8, and then you increase to 2, etc., all the way to 8. Therefore, if the objective is to have the number of lights correspond to the number of days, there is no alternative to increasing their number with the passing of each day. Okay. We still can't. Another teaching, same idea. Rabbi Bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said there were 2 elders in Sidon, and one of them acted in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai, one of them acted in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. Each provided reasons for his actions. One gave reason for his actions, the number of lights correspond to the bulls of the festival, and one gave a reason for his actions. The number of lights is based on the principle one elevates to a higher level in matters of sanctity, and one does not downgrade. Okay, so in other words, it seems like the second opinion is the opinion that stuck. And that's why if you go to any menorah lighting, the rabbi needs to make a sermon, and the rabbi didn't have time to prepare. So what the rabbi is going to say is, the message of Hanukkah is what Hillel teaches. The message of Hanukkah is that you should always increase in holiness. What a beautiful, easy sermon prepared to us by the Talmud from one of the interpretations of the reasoning of Hillel. So that's all seems straightforward, but as always, what seems straightforward is almost never straightforward. Okay, so far so clear, so good. Can we continue? Because there's more details coming. So far I want to make sure we have these details. And to summarize, the big idea is one way to keep the basic way to do the mitzvah, 1 candle per household. The better way to do the mitzvah, the more beautiful way to do the mitzvah, is one candle per person in each household. And the third way is that you light corresponding to the days, either Shamai where you decrease or Hillel you increase. That's the Talmud. And then we have 2 opinions regarding the reason for the disagreement between Shamai and Hillel. Okay, so all sounds clean, all sounds beautiful. So where does the excitement begin? The excitement begins, the Rebbe points to one word. Ula said, there is a disagreement. 2 Amoraim in the West disagreed. Now, disagreed is a very strong word. It's a pligi, it's a machlekes, it's a disagreement. The implication of it's a disagreement is that we're not just offering multiple reasons. Sometimes you have one mitzvah with multiple reasons, but it's not a disagreement, right? We could be an addition, right? Sometimes you could have one mitzvah and you have 10 reasons, and they're not arguing. All the reasons could be true simultaneously. The reasons are not mutually exclusive. But if the Talmud says, Ula says, that the 2 reasons of why for the disagreement of Shammai and Hillel, whether we increase or decrease, either it's because we want to count the days coming in or going out, the days who have passed or the days who are yet to come, or because we want to either align with the bulls of the temple who decreased, or we want to follow the principle that you're always supposed to increase in holiness. So these 2 reasons, if it's a disagreement, it means they're mutually exclusive. It means that they have a different philosophy. They don't align. And it means even more. It means that there must be a practical difference between these two reasons. Because if the reasons could be mutually exclude, or could be simultaneous, then there's no practical difference. But if there's a practical difference between these reasons, then it's a real disagreement. So what we want to figure out now is what practical disagreement could emerge from the difference between these, from the two opinions of the reasons of Shammai and Hiro. Again, it's complicated because there's a lot of details here. Shammai and Hiro. Shammai says you decrease, Hiro says you increase. What is the reason for the disagreement? We have two possibilities. One possibility is we're tracking the days, either the days that have passed, like Hiro says, or the days that are yet to come, like Shammai says. Or it's a separate concept that has to do with either aligning with the bulls of the Sukkot, which decrease, or we want to always increase in holiness. So we have a disagreement to explain the disagreement of Shammai and Hiro. And what we're trying to do is we want to find a practical difference, that there would be a disagreement in the law, in the halacha, and what you do based on the reason, what you believe the reason of Shammai and Hiro to be. So I hope it's not yet confusing, but if it is, I'm just going to add one more level of detail. And then once we have one level of detail, everything will hopefully fall into place. Okay, I'm assuming everything is clear. Now we have to go back. We have to go back, and this is a very interesting disagreement. So what the Rebbe is doing now, what we're about to do, is we're about to introduce another disagreement, which seems unrelated. And what we're going to do is going to say that the disagreement between, I'll say it, the Tosafot and the Rambam, Maimonides and other commentaries in the Talmud, collection of commentaries called Tosafot. The disagreement between that we know, there's an important disagreement between Maimonides and Tosafot. So it's post-Talmudic commentaries, but there's a very important disagreement. What the Rebbe is going to do is going to explain that known disagreement between Tosafot and Rambam is actually tied in to the disagreement of what is the reason of Shammai and Hiro's disagreement. If you believe like Tosafot, then you think the reason of Shammai and Hiro is A, and if you believe it Maimonides, then that's because you believe that the reasons of Shammai and Hiro is B. So we have a lot of disagreements here. We have a disagreement between Shammai and Hiro. We have a disagreement between the reasons of Shammai and Hiro. And now we have a disagreement, which I'll introduce right now, between Maimonides and Tosafot. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that the disagreement between Maimonides and Tosafot is premised on the disagreement of what is the reason of Shammai and Hiro. And if we can get all this down together, that would be an accomplishing morning. What is the big disagreement between Tosafot and Rambam? So before we even go to describe, so what is Tosafot? So if you look at any Talmudic page, you know what? We have technology. I'll try to share it right now. Every page of the Talmud, ever since the printing press, or not ever since the earliest prints of the Talmud, I don't know if it's literally the first. So I'm just going to share a random page of the Talmud. It's not that random. It's the Daf Hayomi. It's the daily Daf. So it's not that random, but I'm just going to share it. Okay. So here's your classic page of Talmud. So in the middle is the words of the Talmud. On the inner column, because this is the left, there's two pages, this is the left page. On the inner column is Rashi. Everybody knows Rashi's commentary. Rashi made a very famous commentary on the Chumash, on the Bible, but he also made a commentary on the Talmud. So the inner column of every Talmud page has the commentary of Rashi. Then the outer column has what they call Tosafot. Tosafot literally means the addition. It's an addition, it's additional commentary. Who was the Tosafot? So the secret is that it's not one person, it's a collection of people. It's sages, which was in the generation after Rashi. Many of them were his sons-in-law and grandsons, but also other people. And they lived in France and Germany. And they made commentaries on the Talmud. And it's very in-depth commentary. It's not so focused on the law. It's more focused on explaining the Talmud and really synchronizing the apparent disagreements between various places in the Talmud. So it's more about the understanding of Talmud, not so focused on the law. But nevertheless, it's a very important commentary. And like I said, it's a collection of people. Sometimes they're named, sometimes they are not. In other words, sometimes it's named after a specific person. It says, oh, Rabbi Yosef said this. Sometimes Rabbeinu Tam said that. So sometimes it attributes a specific person. If not, it's just Tosafot, which is the collection of sages in France and Germany writing the Tosafot. While this is happening in France and Germany, which is Western Europe and Christian Europe, you have other centers of Torah in Muslim countries, which are where you have many great Talmudic sages, but including Maimonides. And sort of two different traditions develop, Sfarad and Ashkenaz. So Tosafot are more like the Ashkenaz custom, and Maimonides is really one of the origins of the Sephardic custom. And now there's a big disagreement between Maimonides and Tosafot. What's fascinating is everything is upside down. It happens to be that in this case, the Ashkenaz custom follows Maimonides, and the Sephardic custom follows Tosafot. Everything is upside down. Usually, the Ashkenazim follow Tosafot because that was written in France and Germany, and they're the sort of the fathers and parents of the Ashkenazic understanding of the Talmud. And Maimonides, of course, in Muslim countries, Muslim Spain, and then ultimately Egypt is usually the pillar of Sephardic custom. Almost all matters, Sephardic custom follows Maimonides. This is an exception. The following is the exception. What is the big disagreement between Tosafot and Maimonides? What's very interesting is that this agreement is not recorded in the Talmud, because it's such a simple question that how come it wasn't written in the Talmud? I don't know, but it's not recorded until the post-Talmudic commentaries. What's the disagreement? So we're going all the way back to the beginning of the day. We said there are three ways of doing the mitzvah. The basic mitzvah is to do one candle per person, per household. The second level, if you want to beautify the mitzvah, you don't do one candle per household. What you do is you do one candle per person in the household. So if you have two people, night number 2, you light 2, night number 3, you light 2, night number 4, you light 2, etc. So it's per person. So we have the regular mitzvah, and then we have the people who beautify the mitzvah. Now comes the big question. We're introducing a new level. We're saying the mahadrin mina mahadrin, those who beautify even more than those who beautify. Okay, so they beautify even more. What do they say? They say it depends on the days. You go 1 to 8 or 8 to 1. For the sake of simplicity, it goes 1 to 8. Now the question is are they commenting on the basic mitzvah, or are they commenting on the people who beautify the mitzvah? In other words, 1 per day per household, or 1 per day per person in the household, right? Let's say I have 5 people in the household, and I want to do the mitzvah the best way possible, which is you have to light it based on the days of the week, based on the days of Hanukkah. So what do? Do I have one Hanukkah menorah for the entire household? In other words, level 3 corresponds with level 1. Level 1 says 1 candle per household. Level 3 says, no, not 1 candle per household. Every day you increase 1 per household. But level 3 is talking to level 1. Or is level 3 talking to level 2? Level 2 says 1 candle per person. So level 3 says 1 Hanukkah menorah per person. In other words, every person in the household should be increasing per day. So this is a fascinating discussion, and what's most fascinating is that the Talmud itself doesn't tell you. It seems like a very simple question, but I don't know why it's not in the Talmud. You have to wait 500 years after the Talmud for Maimonides and Tosafot to fight it out. What's interesting is that, if I'm not mistaken, we follow Maimonides. In other words, we're saying Maimonides says every person should increase, and the Ashkenazim do. That's what the Ashkenazim do. But Maimonides says, in my days, all over Spain, which was at that point Muslim Spain, everybody, they're only lighting 1 menorah per household. Even though Maimonides, and that's what Tosafot says. So it's all backward. In other words, the Ashkenazim follow the Sephardim, Sephardim follow the Ashkenazim. It's a mess. Okay. We're not done yet. What do we have so far? We have disagreement. We have three ways of studying we have three layers of doing the mitzvah. Basic layer is layer 1, which is one person per household. Then we have level number 2, which is, level 1 is one candle per household every day. Level 2 is what? Level 2 is one candle per person in the household, and that stays the same every day. Level 3 is we increase. Shamai, Hiro, you correspond to the days, 1 to 8 or 8 to 1. Okay. We're not sure now. We're left with a disagreement between Tosafot and Rambam of, if I want to do the third way, do I just have one menorah in my house? In other words, I increase one per household, or do I increase based on the people in the household? If I have 5 people in the household the first night, I light 5 on the first night, 10 on the second night, etc. That's a disagreement. What we want to do is we want to now go back to the Talmud. We want to look at the reasons of Shamai and Hiro. And remember, there were 2 reasons. And what we want to say, the reason why Tosafot and Rambam are arguing whether level 3 corresponds with level 1 or level 3 corresponds with level 2, in other words, whether the third level means to increase a menorah, to increase every day, 1 per household or 1 per person in the household, that is dependent on the disagreement of what is the reason of Shammai and Hiro. And depending on what you believe is the reason of Shammai and Hiro, that would be the explanation of why you either rule like Tessafort or like Maimonides, whether or not to increase to increase 1 per household or 1 per or 1 per person in every household. So this is what we have to do. We have to now put it all together. But there's a lot of moving parts here. So I hope we're keeping track. Comments, questions, jokes. Now is a good time. Otherwise, we pull out the needle and thread, and we start sewing the disagreements together, and we start showing how these ideas are dependent one on another. Okay. If you didn't sign off the call, I imagine that you're still with me. Good. But if you're not, you got to protest. You have to speak up. Let's go back to the reasons in the Talmud. Ula said, in other words, this reasons of the disagreement between Shammai and Hiro, where Shammai says you start with 8 to go down to 1, Hiro says you start with 1, go up to 8. Ula said, there are 2 Amoraim in the West, Eretz Yisrael, who disagreed with regard to this dispute. Rabbi Yossi bar Rav and Rabbi Yossi bar Zavida. One said that the reason for Beit Shammai's opinion is that the number of lights correspond to the incoming days. And the reason of Beis Hillel corresponds to the outgoing days. I'm skipping all the non-bold. And one said that the reason for Beit Shammai's corresponds to the bulls of the festival. The reason of Beis Hillel opinion is that one elevates in sanctity and one does not downgrade. Okay, what we need to do is we need to figure out of these 2 opinions, which opinion is going to say that you should light 1 Hanukkah menorah. In other words, day 1, day 2, per household or per person. That's what we want to try to figure out. But before that, I have to take a peek at the Rebbe's talk to make sure I don't mislead you. Okay, ready to go. Okay, ready to jump in, ready for the dive. Here we go. If you believe that the main disagreement between Shammai and Hiro is to know, Shammai says we want to light corresponding to the amount of days that remain. Day 1, you have 8 days left. And the reason of Beis Hillel is because you want to know about how many days have passed. If that's the case, if that's the primary reason, don't light one Hanukkah menorah per person. Why? Because I'm going to walk into your house the first night of Hanukkah. I'm going to see 5 candles. I don't know what night of Hanukkah is. I'm going to think it's 5. I'm going to think it's day 5. If the purpose is to give an indication of what night it is, then one per household is preferable. Now you can ask me a question, because today they sell menorahs and they're all lined and they're all neat. And you could see that a person has 5 different menorahs. Each one has 1 candle. Okay, that's in the modern world. But in Talmudic times, they didn't have the fancy menorah. What did you do? You lit a light and you lit a candle and you put it on the table. Or you lit a little jug of oil, a container of oil, and you put it on the table. It wasn't a specific menorah. So you walk into someone's house and you see 10 lights. You have no idea. Is it the first night of Hanukkah and there are 10 people there? Is it the 5th night of Hanukkah and there are 2 people here? There's going to be no indication from the amount of candles to know what day it is. Now, if you believe that Shamai and Hiro the big disagreement is whether or not you should increase, whether or not you should increase or decrease, is the main reason is to tell you, we want people to understand what day of Hanukkah it is. If that's what you believe, then you're going to follow Tosafot, who says that the 3rd level to increase or decrease corresponds to level 1, meaning to say that when you're increasing or decreasing, do 1 per household. Because if you're going to do 1 per person, there's just going to be too many candles. No one's going to have any idea what day of the week it is. So what day of Hanukkah it is? So what did we just do? We just did and said, if the primary reason is to know what day it is, then you're going to light 1 candle, you're going to light a menorah, you're going to increase or decrease only 1 per household. That's what Tosafot says. The other opinion is, as we saw, give me just a second, Vicky, we'll get to you in a second. The other opinion is it has nothing to do with the days of Hanukkah, right? Beit Shammai's opinion is that the number of lights correspond to the bulls of the festival of Sukkot, which means spiritually, for whatever reason, we'll discuss it, it's not on this talk, but we can mention it, I mentioned in the past years. For whatever reason, Shammai says you want to decrease. Hillel says, no, you have to elevate in holiness. But according to the second opinion, it has nothing to do with what day Hanukkah it is. You want to know what day Hanukkah is? Go look at your calendar. Go look at your Apple Watch. Go do whatever you want. But it's not the job of the candles to indicate what day of Hanukkah it is. If that's the case, so if you believe that the second reason is the primary reason, then you will follow what our custom is, which is what Maimonides says, which is every person in the household has to increase or decrease. Every person in the household has to either align himself with the diminishing cows of the festival or with the principle of increase in holiness and don't decrease. But if it has nothing to do with the days, then it's on the person. And if it's the person, every person in the household should add a menorah. So what we just did, before we take any questions, what we just did is that we showed that we have a disagreement of the reasons of Shammai and Hillel. And it seems like it's not that significant. Who cares? There's multiple reasons, but we're saying no, since the Talmud says there's a debate about the reason. It uses the word pligi. There's a debate about the reason. So that indicates that there's actually a practical ramification between these 2 reasons, because these reasons are, and since there is a practical ramification, the reasons are mutually exclusive. You can't have both. Why is that? What's the difference? What's the difference between the reasons? In other words, what is the practical ramifications between the reasons? So we say, you remember the disagreement between Tosafot and Rambam? Whether or not you increase, whether or not opinion 3 follows is in addition to 1 or addition to 2, whether or not increasing every night should be done 1 per household, like the regular mitzvah, or 1 per person in the household, like level 2 of the mitzvah, that depends on what the reason of Shammai and Hillel is. If the reason of Shammai and Hillel, the reason of the debate is that the reason why we're increasing or decreasing is to show is to indicate what night of Hanukkah it is, then it's preferable to have 1 per household. Because it's very clear. There's only 1 candle. We know it's day 1. There's 2 candles. We know it's day 2. But if you think it has nothing to do with the amount, with the days of, what day of the month it is, with day of Hanukkah it is, it has to do with a separate principle. The principle of, are we supposed to decrease like the bulls of the holiday, which we can discuss that. It's not in this talk, but we can discuss that. Or am I supposed to increase in holiness? So then it applies to the person, nothing to do with the days of Hanukkah. So therefore, every person should be increasing or decreasing, and therefore level 3 follows level 2. In other words, every person in the household should increase if you follow Hiro. So that is how we tied all 3 disagreements together. I hope this has been fun, very detailed. We'll take the question or two, and then we'll just give a little spice of Kabbalah just to say, oh, it wasn't just all technical today, and then we'll go celebrate for Hanukkah. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I think you partially answered that question. My question is to show to who? Because people who light the candles, for outsider probably, because people who light the candles know exactly how many days, which day of Hanukkah it is.
So that's a good point. Is it to show? Well, in general, Hanukkah is very interesting that the Talmud says that the mitzvah to light the candles, the preferable mitzvah is to light it at your door facing outward. That was the preferable. Tonight we don't do it for technical reasons, but I remember when I was in Jerusalem on Hanukkah, everybody literally lights the menorah on the street. They have a courtyard, and then they have the street, courtyard on the street. At the gate between the courtyard and the street, that's where they light the menorah. And the Talmud says it's pirsume niso. We want to publicize the miracle. Something about Hanukkah is about publicizing the miracle, not just keeping it in your home, but publicizing it. That's why we do public menorahs. But again, that's a recent custom, but it's premised on the concept that Hanukkah is about publicizing the mitzvah. So it's publicizing to others clearly, but also it's to myself, right? To myself. I come into my house, it's day number 3, there's 10 people in the house, there's 30 candles. Do I have to start pulling out my calculator to calculate how many people are here? And then from there, I get to the conclusion of what day of Hanukkah it is. No, if the purpose is to make it clear what day of Hanukkah is, even for myself, as a reminder, it has to be clear. And therefore, I'd rather, on day 7, I'd rather have 7 candles than have 17 candles, or whatever. It doesn't divide as 17. Maybe it does, yeah. The bottom line is, it's preferable. If you think the primary reason of Shamai and Hiro is to tell you what day it is, it's preferable to be simple and say 1 per household. If you believe it has nothing to do with the days of Hanukkah, has to do with independent principles of either Shamai says you want to decrease like the bulls of the holiday, or you want to increase because the principle is in holiness, you increase, then so what? I don't care if people coming in will be confused what day of Hanukkah it is. You want to know what day of Hanukkah it is, you figure it out. Look at the calendar or see how sick you are from eating the donuts. And from there, you'll be able to extrapolate what day of Hanukkah it is. But the point here is it's got nothing to do with an indication of the days, and therefore it has everything to do with independent principles, and therefore every person, it's preferable. You want to do the mitzvah in the best way. Every member of the household should be either increasing or decreasing. That is the story in short. There's a lot more to say on this, but we'll leave it for now. And then I want to just give a spiritual insight that the Rebbe explained elsewhere, nothing to do with this talk. But with this talk, it goes a little further. There's okay. I think we stop here. Let's go to the spirituality for a second. This is a very strange concept. Shammai says you have to decrease in holiness. I said this in the past, so you know this. Shammai says you have to decrease in holiness. How do I know? You have to decrease. How? Because in the temple, the bulls decrease. What does Hillel say? Hillel says, no. You always have to. We have a well-established principle that in holiness you always increase. If I'm Shammai, I tell Hillel, really? We always increase in holiness? What about the bulls of the temple? The bulls of the temple decrease. It's a biblical commandment every day. The first day 13, next day 12, etc. Decrease. So what is Hillel telling me? You're always supposed to increase when Shammai just finished telling you that we have a precedent that we decrease. So that's the one question. That's one question we have. But we have other questions about Shammai and Hillel. So first, I'm going to put the point out here, and we'll say the point, and then we'll see how we can explain it. The point is like this. Let's start from another angle, from the parable. What's the best way, if a person is engaged, a person has a negative habit, what's the best way to break a negative habit? So there are 2 schools of thought, and I'm not saying which one is right, which one's wrong. They're probably both, whatever. We'll get to that later, which one's right, which one's wrong. Probably depends on the person, right? Anytime you make a generalization, it's probably not true. But so I'm not telling you what's right or wrong. But in general, it probably depends on the person and on what we're talking about. But in general, I have a negative habit. I have an obstacle. Okay, I'll start with a negative habit. We'll start from this end. I have a negative habit. how to break the habit. One way to break the habit is to stop completely. Stop the negative habit completely. Try to stop cold turkey, whatever the negative habit may be. That's one way to stop a negative habit, which works for some people. So I've been drinking a liter of Coca-Cola a day, and I say, you know what? I'm not happy with the amount of sugar. I'm going to stop. Whoops. Okay, so I'm drinking a liter of Coca-Cola a day. I'm not happy, and I'm going to stop completely. And that works for some people some of the time. Another way to battle the negativity is, instead of stopping the negative behavior, introduce positive behavior. If you eat salad in the morning, you don't have enough room to eat the jelly donuts because you're too full of salad. In other words, the more you do positive activities, the more positive habits you have, the less time you'll have for the negative habits. So that's the question. Where do you start from? Which one is better? It doesn't matter. We'll get to that later. Shamai says, if you want to get rid of the negativity within your soul, that's really what the Hanukkah Menorah is. You have to start. There's no point of introducing positive habits when you are in a negative environment. There's no point of going to the nutritionist, and the nutritionist will tell you start eating broccoli if every day I'm eating a gallon of ice cream. There's no point. So first, stop the negative, and then we could talk about increasing the positive. Now, if you take that path, what happens is, in the beginning, it's very, very difficult to stop the negativity. It's very, very difficult. Over time, it gets easier. At some point, I stopped putting sugar in my coffee. This was about 20 years ago. And in the beginning, it was very hard. It took a lot of self-control. Now it's easy. Today, I put sugar in the coffee. It tastes sweet. It tastes disgusting, right? But in the beginning, it's hard. Over time, it gets easier. So Shammai says, start the menorah, start with all 8 candles, because you need all that energy. You need all your engines blazing to be able to battle the negativity, because you have to start completely with focus. If you're battling the evil, you have to separate from the evil completely right away. Don't make compromises. If it's bad for you, stop it immediately. And that's why you need all the engines blazing. Now, we can take the other example. Let's say a person has a project, not a bad habit. That's one way to look at it. But I have a project and I'm procrastinating. I'm not doing it for whatever reason. Shammai would say, you know how you do it? One day you stop and dedicate the entire day to this project. Don't do anything else. Go all in all the time. I want to write a book. Take a week off, sit from sunrise to sunset and write. And push yourself and write. If you do that, in the beginning it's hard, later it gets easy. It gets easier. So you have to start with your full menorah, and then you could decrease, not because you're decreasing in goodness. You're increasing in goodness, but you're decreasing in the battling the evil. And according to Shammai, going back to the temple, when the temple says we decrease in the bulls, because the bulls represent refining the negative energy. And therefore, every day you have to do less of it, because the previous day's negative energy has already been refined. So that's Shammai's path. And that's why Shammai says, Shammai's idea, that's why Hillel's idea of increasing in holiness is not a contradiction to Shammai's idea of decreasing the bulls, because Hillel says, no, the bulls, it's not about decreasing in holiness. It's about decreasing in battling the negativity, which you'll have to do less and less of the battling the negativity every day, because every day after you battle the negativity has less of a pull, less of a draw upon you. What does Hillel say? Hillel says, yeah, in the times of the temple, that's the way they did it. Times of the temple, it was easier to be able to come out strong and say no when no was necessary and battle the evil. And then you follow the pattern of Shammai and the pattern of the decreasing bulls, where you go in all the way, either to battle a negative concept or to overcome an obstacle. I have a project, I'm just going to throw myself into it completely. But Hillel says, but today it's not, we can't do that, because not everybody can do that. Most people can't do that. Most people, the path for them, for their spiritual growth, is to not battle the negativity, but increase light. And if you increase light, then the pattern changes. Then you increase a little bit every single day. If you want to separate from negativity, you increase positive habits. If you want to have a project you have to do, don't tell yourself, I'm going to do the entire day today. Say, you know what? I'm only going to do for 5 minutes today. And tomorrow, 6 minutes. And in that sense, your menorah fills up. So that's the spiritual explanation of the debate between Shammai and Hillel. They're debating what's the best way to achieve. Is it a way where you battle either the negativity or the obstacle head on? And if you battle it head on, full force, it's harder in the beginning, but then you decrease the light, meaning that the effort necessary to battle it decreases. Or does Hillel say you can't battle it head on? What you should do is you should be increasing light. And the more light you increase, by definition, there'll be less energy for the negativity. And if that's the pattern, then you go from a little bit, from few, then you start by introducing one little light, and then you increase every day. So that is another angle, the spiritual side of this disagreement. I hope this was interesting. It was very detailed, but I hope this was somewhat interesting. Thank you for joining. Happy Hanukkah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. Happy Hanukkah.